Good evening. This is Mae Brussell. The title of this broadcast is World Watchers. It's a 1-hour analysis of the news. I hope that you tape it right off the air. If you don't, copies of the broadcast are available. And also you may send for the bibliography sheet that I use for each broadcast. Write to Mae, M-A-E, Brussell, B-R-U-S-S-E-L-L, P.O. Box 25211, Carmel, California, 93922. I started the program last week with a Reaganism of the Week. Lou Cannon publishes them in the Washington Post, and I thought I'd do the same thing this week. He had some outrageous quotations when he was governor of California, and he's been keeping them up as president of the United States. This week, regarding the Challenger shuttle disaster, after he got his report from William Rogers and the commission that studied that tragedy, Reagan said, in quotes, "Maybe part of it was also due. I've often wondered this. If part of it wasn't due to the balmy climate of Florida, and it was difficult for anybody to believe that they'd have a cold snap that could render that O-ring dangerous." Translated, that means it was hard for him to believe that the decision to launch the same evening that he would be giving his State of the Union message defied his conception of that there's a balmy night in Florida around the clock and every month of the year. The New York Times published part of the Challenger study of this event, and they have a little section with a diagram called Launching the Cold. And in this diagram, it explains that when the Challenger was launched on January the 28th, the temperature of the joints was 28 degrees. 25 degrees colder than on the previous coldest launch. So I don't think they were going on the assumption of balmy evenings when early in the morning they were told it was too cold to take off because of the icicles around the shuttle. And then about 2 hours later they went anyway, and it was still cold and not very balmy. A member of the commission that put the report together, Albert Whelan, he's the executive vice president of Hughes Aircraft. He had an interview right after the report came out, June the 7th, 1986. The San Francisco Chronicle has large black letters under their picture. It says, "Not like reading a murder mystery, White House gets shuttle probe report." And then the quotation of Albert Whelan is, "Don't expect a detective thriller. It's not like reading to the last page and finding out who done it. You kind of already know that." Well, who done it? Do we already know it? And where are the logs of the White House with their communication down to NASA that very day? 7 calls they made. But he goes on, and describes it's not exactly a mystery story because you know who did it, and so you don't expect anything like a detective thriller. Muammar Gaddafi is somewhat in hiding since the bombing of Libya. But the newspaper JANA, J-A-N-A, that's the official newspaper from Libya, the official press agency, had an interesting quotation from Muammar Gaddafi's speech. He recently gave one, June the 11th, and the quotation that was reprinted in London and picked up by JANA said, in quotes, "A search is underway in all the documents on Reagan's past in the Gestapo." This is Muammar Gaddafi saying. Now, I have believed that the time that he co-starred with Errol Flynn, when Errol Flynn was a member of the Gestapo with Dr. Urban, that Ronald Reagan's conservatism began, well, not when he was co-starring in 1940 and in 1942 with Errol Flynn, but began when he left the college in Illinois and the radio announcing and was flown to Catalina and then got a contract at Warner Brothers. I think his Gestapo background goes into Chicago, the far-right fundamentalists, the silver shirts, the nucleus of the future very far-right organizations in this country now. And I won't run them down for you at this time because that's another subject that I've done and can do again. But it's interesting that maybe Muammar Gaddafi is discovering that information is power, and information about Ronald Reagan, not only with Gestapo agents, but if he in fact had a past similar to Errol Flynn's with Dr. Urban, it would explain everything that he has done from the Hollywood film days to General Electric to his position as governor and the people he was surrounded with and his absolute dedication now to making World War III against the Soviet Union. The very important change of justices this week can't be passed over, and I'll be doing a lot of that, an opinion of these various new people that are taking top positions as Chief Justice and as new appointee on the court. But Warren Burger stepped down for a specific reason as the Chief Justice, and that was to take over the celebration of the Constitution. In 1987, there's going to be a 200th anniversary of the United States Constitution. And it seems to be so important, and the beginning funds for it are going to cost $200 million, that does this really require the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court to step down to get ready to celebrate a Constitution that he's supposed to be observing every day? And what are the implications of Warren Burger taking on this new role to put together this committee? The first committee was plagued by a person assigned to the job of raising the money and putting on the celebration. That's the former Senator Roger Jepsen from Iowa, and he lost his Senate seat in 1984 after telling the Congress and having discovered that he was engaged in nude encounters in a Des Moines health spa. But after he was moved aside, the committee was in disarray, and the choice of Warren Burger, the Chief Justice, taking on this so-called anniversary of the Constitution is very eerie. Way back in 1979, August the 3rd, 1979, on my program of World Watchers, it was broadcast number 400. I cited the study that was done from the University of Chicago with Rexford Tugwell, and it was part of a group of brain trusts out of the University of Chicago that moved to Santa Barbara and worked in conjunction with Adolf Buell. I've given his background many times on various programs and his links to bringing in the Iron Guard, the Romanian Iron Guard, into this country, Nazi war criminals. Among them, some were placed like Nikolai Malaksa in Richard Nixon's law office in Whittier. And the institute that decided on the new Constitution, or what would be the best Constitution for America, was moved to Santa Barbara from Chicago in 1964. It was signed by Rexford Tugwell, and the essence of it was to do away with 50 states, make 20 republics. The president would be one term, 9 years. The Senate would be approved for life. The former vice president would be a traveling representative of the country in different other countries. There would no longer be a Bill of Rights, a no trial by jury, and no right to bear arms. But the interesting thing is that when that was put together, Warren Burger, as the Chief Justice of the United States, oh no, this was before he was appointed Chief Justice, he was in Michigan, he flew out to California. This was in New York Times, September 8th, 1970. He flew to California to insist that the trial by jury be one of the things eliminated from the new Constitution. He said it slows the wheel of justice and the adversary system. It doesn't necessarily produce justice. So Warren Burger was against a trial by jury, and now he's in charge of the celebration of the Constitution, of which he was a part and member to destroy. Now that gets eerie because I've said for a long time that the purpose of a constitutional convention, the main purpose, is to change the Constitution to allow a foreign-born, specifically Henry Kissinger, to become President of the United States. And I believe that the raising of our debts, our budget, and the deficit has increased where we're still spending money. The Graham-Rudman won't hold the line. It will require a constitutional convention, and the excuse is to balance the budget. That will be one of the excuses, but they'll throw in the Henry Kissinger, and now with the new appointee on the court, they'll also try to overthrow the decision that abortion is legal. Now, this coming week, the 4th of July celebration takes place, and Henry Kissinger is going to get a Medal of Honor. I mentioned this before on the program. And if he's in a position where the President of the United States is giving him a Medal for Honor, then they must think that he's capable of becoming President of the United States. He has so much political clout. Now, you think of what he's done in various countries, in Chile. I don't have to run them all down, in Iran, in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, in Central America, South America. What has he done that he deserves a Medal of Honor, except that just as the Esmeralda is going to be in the harbor, invited to participate, the tortured ship from Chile, Henry Kissinger, who put in the Pinochet government and was behind the murder of Salvador Allende, in that dictatorship, Henry Kissinger will get a Medal of Honor. and the Esmeralda will be in the harbor. I mentioned it a few weeks ago. The subject was brought up in the Senate and passed over. The invitation still holds. I updated the Constitution story in May of 1984, 2 years ago, broadcast number 650. And these are very important for new listeners to obtain if you can. And it's about the doing away with the two-party system and making it appear as a two-party system as we work towards a single government. And proposals were put up by Ted Sorensen, former director of the CIA, who works closely with Henry Kissinger and with Michael Ledeen and Claire Sterling and a group from Georgetown Center of Strategic and International Studies to change aspects of our government that are very dangerous. They would have a cabinet and sub-cabinet divided between two parties. President and vice president would be of opposite parties. The president would have advisory council of elder statesmen. And the gist of the new revising of the Constitution and the arrangement of the government is a continuation with the same people who are still alive, some have passed away, of using the excuse that we have such terrible conditions in the world that we can't have opposing Republican and Democratic Party. And again, they brought up the subject of the president serving one term and using the elder statesman. That would include Richard Nixon, who's now described as the elder statesman. And an appraisal of this new Constitution, the changing of the system, came out at the time of the elections, the last elections, and they were published in various newspapers. I have one copy here, August 17th, 1984, from the San Francisco Chronicle, but it has to do with a nonpartisan committee on the constitutional system, and 200 people got together to decide that, yes, this is what we should do, change the Constitution, and it includes people like William Simon, a Knight of Malta, and Clark Clifford, a legal advisor to all of the administrations, and so forth. Now, working with Ted Sorensen of the CIA, an attorney trying to change the Constitution, he's a member of the law office with Simon Rifkin. Rifkin is the lawyer that set up TCI, the corporation that had Otto von Bolschwing in that organization, and John Paul Getty and Helene von Damm as a translator while she worked for Ronald Reagan. And this was the head of the Galen operation in the United States, closely linked to Elmer Bobst and the American Medical Association. And the law offices of Simon Rifkin are very important, as he was the attorney for Chris Kraft. John DeLorean owned a good share of Chris Kraft, and the interconnections of the people in power, such as Henry Kissinger and Simon Rifkin and Sorensen, all weave and mold together. But the important point is that they are updating the idea of changing the Constitution. Warren Burger wants $200 million as a starter. It will maybe look like an innocent study, like we're having the celebration of the Statue of Liberty, but putting Henry Kissinger there to get the award identifies Kissinger with liberty and freedom, and then the next step is to make Henry Kissinger president. Also, the Washington Times last November 13th, 1985, has a long, it's a paid ad, Reagan to seek a third term. It's got a question mark. There's an organization called Patriotic Americans for a Reagan third term, and it's about changing the Constitution again, letting him stay in the Oval Office. And the Patriotic Americans think that Reagan should have a third term. And there are organizations now working very hard to let Ronald Reagan stay in office. Henry Kissinger, the fellow that is the focal point of all these various events and organizations that all come together, gave a speech recently, May 19th, right after the explosion in the Soviet Union at Chernobyl factory, there, the atomic plant. And his speech was about the fact that the Russians are going to outgrow their space within 5 years. They're going to get aggressive, that we have to have a hard line against the Soviet Union because in 5 more years they won't have the resources they need, and there'll be a crisis, and they'll solve it through expansion. Well, Great Britain built their empire by solving it through expansion. The Spanish built their empire the same way. The Germans did theirs. We take colonies such as Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, the Philippines. And so it isn't unique that various large countries and groups have sought territory for expansion. But Henry Kissinger's speech was about Chernobyl, supposed to be about that, and various events taking place. But the main thrust is that within 5 years we have to stop them. And of course he works very heavily with those people involved with Star Wars and an aggressive position such as John Lehman, who announces how he intends to start World War III. The Senate, as I say, passed by hand, I guess, a proposal to do away with the Esmeralda, the ship, the torture ship coming to New York, but the White House just passes that over, and just a suggestion that there was resistance in Congress so that Ted Kennedy and a few could get up and make notice that the torture ship will be there for the celebration, but the powers that be are very much in control and not interested in that kind of talk. Another interesting link of Kissinger, who's getting the Medal of Honor, that can develop very, I don't know how far it's going to go, is the link of the murder of Olof Palme of Sweden to Chile. Now, to have Palme murdered by somebody who they are trying to connect to Michael Townley and the persons that killed Orlando Letelier and Ronnie Moffat in Washington, D.C., isn't hard to do. Henry Kissinger ordered the murder of Allende, ordered him removed, put in Pinochet, and the people that killed Orlando Letelier and Ronnie Moffat in Washington, D.C., have direct links to Kissinger and to the powers that be that can use Chilean or American CIA assassins very easily, because they go between this country and Chile and around the world over into Germany. And the people that killed Letelier and Moffat were over in Germany before they came to the United States for this murder. So the Stockholm police have asked the FBI, which will be of little use under Mr. Webster, to look into the case of the murder of Orlando Letelier and the American Michael Townley, because they believe that there are links to the person who killed Olof Palme. Now, Kissinger is very, very close to Sweden and to the powers that be. I'm not going to digress to that now because I have much more I want to get into, but I'll do the Swedish connections to biotechnology, to advanced genetic sciences, and to the Olof Palme murder in the weeks to come. But again, Kissinger has a finger in all these pieces of the pie, and George Bush, our vice president, was the CIA director at the time of the Letelier-Moffat murders and is directly linked to the military junta in Chile. There was an article in the San Francisco Chronicle now, getting back to the Challenger for a moment, and many of you might have seen it was syndicated, I guess, by AP around the country. The title of the article is Shuttle Photo Caption Errors, and this is a correction by Harold G. Buell, Assistant General Manager for the Associated Press, that the picture taken of Krista McAuliffe's parents at the time the shuttle was launched was one of horror or surprise at the launching, and it wasn't the horror or the reaction when the shuttle exploded a moment later. Now, that it doesn't make much difference when the picture was taken, during the launch or at the explosion time. It was a very effective picture, but the interesting thing is that the person in charge of the films who played them back and who apologized for erroneously captioning this photograph is Harold G. Buell, working with NASA on the launch photographs when so many of the other cameras were confiscated. Now, going back again in time, for you new listeners or some old listeners that don't remember, August the 1st, 1983, 3 years ago, broadcast number 608, I was talking about Harold Buell and the information that I had that he was the courier for money that John DeLorean paid for cocaine that he gave to Klaus Barbie, that the cocaine came from Bolivia and was put into the bank account of Joseph Mengele in Zurich, Switzerland, November the 13th to 15th, 1982. I have the town and the dates that he traveled there, and he, according to my sources, is a courier for this kind of activity and was in Zurich, Switzerland. And I have contacted certain authorities involving the Klaus Barbie case, the DeLorean case, and Mengele case, all three, and never get any satisfaction, not a hard no, but no satisfaction on the case. August 15th, 1983, I did more about the links of Joseph Mengele and the CIA, Klaus Barbie and the CIA, drug traffic in South America, and their relationship to Richard Nixon, to Michael Sindona, to Ronald Reagan, and Licio Gelli, and to Paul Laxalt, and the Las Vegas connections, and then going down to 20th Century Fox in Hollywood, in Beverly Hills, California, actually just outside of Beverly Hills, where William Rogers is on the board of directors of Fox Studio, and the relationship of Henry Kissinger and William Rogers to the scandals of drug money, Nazis, and the meshing of the drug traffic and the Hollywood connections to the cocaine and the international connections. Now, that same William Rogers is the one that was the person in charge of the shuttle investigation and tried as hard as he could to cover up many aspects of it. August the 27th, 1984, 2 years ago, on broadcast 664, I talked again about the money in Zurich, Switzerland, about Mengele's attorney Fritz Steinecker, and about Mr. Buell as a possible courier to that bank account. And then I talked about Mr. Howell Buell from the Associated Press with a William Buell from Radio Free Europe, and Howell Buell has a uncle or a cousin in the State Department whose name Edgar, his nickname is Mr. Pop Buell. Pop Buell is a funding source to South America medical supplies and to the Contras and to the dictatorships in South America. So the name hasn't been in the news very much, but it's interesting that I have been trying to ask questions and find out more about the Buell family, Howell Buell, Edgar Buell, William Buell. There are links to the State Department, to Radio Free America, to Joseph Mengele and Klaus Barbie. And now he is down there at NASA with a very critical day when the ship, for all purposes, was going to explode. And he's in charge of the photographs, and it was the photographs on the icicles that were caught by the television cameras that literally opened up this case. Now, for the remaining half hour and the remaining part of the program, I want to go into an appointment that was made by Ronald Reagan this past week that is very, very important. I'd like to go fast, but I'm going to go slow because for new listeners, it's complicated, and for old listeners, again, you might forget this. But I'll begin with a story that was in the New York Times, June the 4th, just past week, 2 weeks ago. Former NASA head is the choice of Reagan for science advisor. And the gist of this article is that Ronald Reagan has appointed Dr. William Graham, who's also Admiral William Graham, who was the acting head of NASA just at the time, just from January until the shuttle blew up, actually, who's now been named as the chief of science advisor for the White House. He was the acting director of NASA when it launched in the cold weather. And Dr. Graham has been described in the New York Times in the appointment article as an electrical engineer, long experience in the Defense Department and Energy Department, works with nuclear war weapons and strategy and design of nuclear weapons. The New York Times goes on, there's been a delay in this post since December 2 months ago. A lot of people were wanting this position as science advisor. George Keyworth II was acting advisor for the president. He's an ardent supporter of the administration's space-based anti-missile defense system, the Star Wars system, and he's going back to a private consulting firm. I'm supposed to work on that. The delay brought sharp criticism from officials because the president wouldn't assign a person to be head of the science group, and there's a group called the American Association for the Advancement of Science. It's the largest scientific group in the United States, and evidently it covers biology and DNA and all kinds of scientific research, as well as atomic science and radiation and war weapons. Science is a broad science in this term. American Association for the Advancement of Science, and a spokesman for them was glad that the president had resolved this position. It pays $75,000 a year, and Mr. Graham has a PhD from Stanford, and his nomination requires confirmation from the Senate, so it remains to be seen if he will be appointed. Now, Reagan has selected as the head of his science department a man who allowed the launching to take place, and the disaster took place. So instead of moving him out to pasture because he wasn't minding the fence, even though he had only been acting director for 1 month, he was an admiral. Richard Truly is an admiral. The launching was scary with the icicles. I have no position in defense or weapons or missiles, and I saw what was going on that morning of January the 28th. So he's now come in as, after being acting director of NASA at the time of the accident, to be the chief science advisor under the president. The former director of NASA, Mr. Beggs, it was moved out because of indictment, because of huge caused overruns at General Dynamics, and he stepped aside. Now, the day that the launch took place, the NASA launch took place, I cited that Mr. Graham, Admiral Graham, wasn't even in his office to watch it take place, even though he was the acting director for 1 month. The launch was delayed 3 days because of weather. It was important enough that Vice President George Bush was supposed to see the launch on Sunday and couldn't stay down because of the delays, because it was a commitment. The morning launch was scrubbed because of icicles, so you would think that Graham would be watching very attentively at the NASA offices because of the very tricky conversations the night before, and Rockwell saying don't launch. Michael Deaver is the public relations man representing Rockwell now, and he certainly has a foot into the White House, had a pass in and out. So the same day of the launch, Daniel Graham was in the office of Representative Manuel Lujan, Luyan Jr. of New Mexico, on broadcast 740. It was February the 10th. I asked the question, why wasn't he curious to watch this launch? Now, the news media did say that there was one other person, there may have been many who didn't watch it, who should have, but there was one who wouldn't watch it because he knew the icicles were dangerous and he didn't want to see these people blow up. And he was one of the people saying, don't send it off in this cold weather. And I just wonder why Mr. Graham was in Congress, in the halls of Congress, with Manuel Lujan. Now, New Mexico, Los Alamos, New Mexico, is where the testing of atomic bombs, hydrogen bombs, and so forth take place, and the rockets and missiles. It's the sister station along with Lawrence Livermore Lab for all kinds of experimentations. And Lujan is the ranking GOP member on the House Science Technology Committee. And as soon as this ship blows up, they'll have another one built to replace it. It may take a few months or years to get it on the drawing board to get the money, but they'll get the money. And this William Graham wasn't even watching it and tending to business. So after this takes place and the shuttle Challenger goes down, he is promoted to be science advisor to the president. Now, he's also a member of the board of directors of the Committee on Present Danger. He is a very conservative man, William Graham. Admiral Graham from NASA is part of the Committee on Present Danger, and I'll go into that in about 1 minute or two. I just are on the second half of this broadcast. Now, when informed of the Graham nomination, according to the New York Times, June the 4th, and this is very important, when informed of the Graham nomination, Lawrence Bogorad, Bogorad, a Harvard University biologist and president-elect of that new group, that new science group is not new, but he's the new president, American Association for the Advancement of Science, said, it is better to have somebody in this office than nobody, of course. And if that person has the ear of the president, that's important. So as Bogorad becomes the new president of the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences, he's saying that we will have the ear of William Graham from the atomic sciences, from the Defense Department, from the atomic energy. He will be a person whose ear is important, and therefore he was familiar enough with Graham from defense work and so forth to say he will represent our interests. He said that's important, and then he says this person who's appointed by Reagan has to be one who understands what science means to the nation's future and understand the scientific community, not what the scientist understands very well what science means, but they've never cared about the community, the pollution, the atomic waste, the radiation, the results of what happens to us has not been the concern of these particular biologists and scientists, and there's no indication that it will be of concern to them in the future. Now, I want to do more. We'll take a 1 minute break, and then I want to go back to Lawrence Bogorad, Bogorad, and AGS, and to Mr. The appointment of William Graham, Admiral Graham, to be the scientific advisor to Ronald Reagan at this time. Ronald Reagan was never particularly kind to the Chicano or Mexican farm workers in California, so it's interesting that this team is ready to put live bacteria into the areas where they will be working, and I've feared for a long time it smells of a possible genocide or a testing of person's strength when exposed to bacteria. That's what I'm leading to, and that's what I'm afraid they're doing. And now with William Graham as a science advisor and his proximity to AGS and other similar people in the so-called science field, I wonder how much is science and how much is manipulative and big business at the expense of the people all around. As I say, we'll take a 1-minute break and then continue with those questions and some more about this appointment that Ronald Reagan made as a science advisor. This is Mae Brussell, and it's side 2 of broadcast 759, June 23rd, 1986. I'm going to pose some questions about this appointment of Admiral Graham. I keep calling him William, but he is Admiral Graham, as a science advisor, in the New York Times quoting Mr. BOGORAD as the person who said it's useful having the ear of the president, because any science advisor, of course, has the ear of the president, so it means that he must have, through Mr. Graham, the ear of the president, because it'd be useful. If they've always had a science advisor, you would have that ear. And to have his name in conjunction with the ear of the president is a little bit disconcerting, because continuing the idea of Ronald Reagan in California and the farms, and then using Monterey County as the very first testing place for live bacteria to be put onto strawberry plants, and they've already put onto trees in Oakland and so forth, and we won't know the consequence for years. Now, Lawrence Bogorad from Harvard is one of the founders, as I say, of AGS, and he is to be the future president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And William Graham, who attended Stanford University, got a degree there, who works with the Defense Department, with the Navy, with John Lehman of the Navy, because he's an admiral, and Lehman is Secretary of the Navy, works with atomic weapons and so forth, will be the head over these various organizations, but will co-work and have a big influence and association with the American Association for Advancement of Science, with the head of AGS being the new president of that particular group. Now, January 27th of this year, 1986, there were hearings in Salinas, in Monterey County, the Board of Supervisors, regarding the advanced genetic sciences. Many of you remember that, and I attended those hearings all day and passed out handbills, which I'll share with you again if we have time, suggesting that the use of AGS was to test the immune system of people working in the farm and field, and similar to the Environmental Protection Agency wanting to think of a way to give Mexican cancers, and then citing the book The Higher Form of Killing, with the intent of the government to test our system for various diseases. And this book is heavily documented, and also Senator Frank Church's book on investigation of mind control and medical experiments in this country that came out after Watergate, 1975-76, have documented the kind of tests that were done to give people syphilis or to give them insanity in such a way that the schizophrenia wouldn't be identified by the psychiatrist as having been chemically altered. So at the hearing, I passed out these sheets asking the question about genocide, and could this be genocide, and are these tests for humans, that they have to center them out here in a somewhat pathetic, the farm workers are almost impoverished, they work under terrible conditions, and the Chavez attempts to make unions available to them really diminished. The Teamsters were replaced by Mr. Cesar Chavez. So anyway, I passed out sheets on January the 27th and did a broadcast on advanced genetic sciences that week, and then continued for 5 or 6 weeks and have updated them ever since, and wrote about AIDS and the immune system, and is this part of an experimentation process that was going to continue using the Environmental Protection Agency. Now, the very next day after those hearings, and the hearings were caused because AGS hadn't notified any of the people in the Monterey County in charge of health that there was going to be such testing out in the fields, and the condition of the testing would be isolated areas, not near families, and the location where they were going to test was right next to several families and right near a school, and they were breaking the very rules that were set down for them to obey, but they hadn't notified any single person. It was only through the Green Party up in Santa Cruz and our Board of Supervisors, the chairman, Sam Karras, going to a meeting the Saturday before that we even got wind that this was happening in our area. And the very next day, January the 28th, separate from AGS, that was the morning that the shuttle blew up, the Challenger blew up, and I began to do broadcasts on the Challenger. And in those broadcasts for the next few weeks, I referred to the conflict between James Beggs of NASA and William Graham. He didn't approve of Graham being the deputy director. And the articles that I cited on this broadcast said that Graham was pushing for space war, for Star War in space, and that Graham was from the Defense Department and was anxious to put nuclear weapons into space. This is our new science advisor. And asked questions about Admiral Graham being the person to represent science and protect our interests when not only was the shuttle going to probably have an accident because of the cold, but they were going to put plutonium on the next shuttle, knowing it was going to go off in January, which is also cold, and knowing the possibility that it could explode because of the solid rocket booster and the failures that it had long ago. So I wonder whether the science advisor to the President of the United States, working with the Office of Science and Technology Policy, with their background in atomic sciences, in the Pentagon, with the Navy, can really serve civilian medical science at all. Who are Lawrence Bogorad in the biology department, and what has biology department got to do with Star Wars, with atomic wars, with an admiral? Why is he so glad that he has an ear with the president? And is the president's advisor to science in concern about biological science, about live bacteria, about genetically altered bacteria, biological situations? Or has this always, and I believe it has, it's a redundant question, been part of the Defense Department, with Admiral Graham moving from NASA into the science spot that was kept open, and the same people that were involved with chemical and biological warfare weapons that worked and supplied Adolf Hitler through the war and continued with these huge contracts afterwards, who are cited in the New York Times as putting up money for AGS, are the DuPonts, Roman Haas, and Standard Oil. And, of course, the directors of AGS come from DuPont and Roman Haas. And where do these areas meet? Where do biology, atomic bombs, Star Wars, and NASA disasters and AGS come together? The months from January, this was the end of January, February, March, April, May, I've been working and weaving the NASA story and the AGS together with never enough time because of the crisis in the Mediterranean and Libya and so forth, but trying to find the relationship between these groups and doing broadcasts on the relationship of NASA with experimentation of AIDS on the Space Shuttle Discovery of Judith Resnick, the late Judith Resnick, who graduated, among other places, from the National Institute of Health, and the relationship of used aircraft to medical experiments, money that never can be questioned because it's a private institute, and then that money going to the projects of genetic engineering and immune system and DNA and things that could touch also identically with problems that would come as a result of the AGS testing, just as the unknown factor about where AIDS came from, locating it in Maryland and in Paris and also in London, the causing of AIDS is the live bacteria, the beginning of another biological warfare, because these people are not separate from those experiments that did result in breaking down the immune system at Fort Detrick, Maryland. Now, interestingly enough, the representative for Johnson & Johnson, the company that was doing the medical experiments on AIDS in the shuttle Discovery, the attorney for them is John J. McCloy of the Warren Commission. I heard his name in conjunction with a lawsuit of the Johnson & Johnson family recently. And McCloy is one of the attorneys for Johnson & Johnson. And he was on the Warren Commission covering up the Eastern European links of the CIA spies to Lee Harvey Oswald and his wife Marina. Louis Nizer, who's an attorney for NASA for the entire space program, wrote the introduction to the Warren Report when the President of the United States was murdered, where we had a literal coup. We have an attorney, his own autobiography, describing how when NASA was formed and the Apollo program was going and the shuttle program. Louis Nizer from New York was brought in as the attorney, the same guy who wrote the Warren Report. And knowing their mischief in the past, I wonder, just exactly what is going on in the science community melting to the military the way it does, and overlaps going back to the Kennedy assassination and to various experimentations on people. Alan Dulles of the Warren Commission ordered 100 million LSD from the Sandoz lab, which is IG Farben, to put on people in America for medical tests. And he was from the law office of Sullivan and Cromwell, where Mr. Adams came from, who came to Oakland to form AGS. And weaving in and out of this story are paths going from the Kennedy assassination to mind control to medical experimentation to the warfare state, and to people who melt together at this particular time under the strangest of circumstances. Now, as I said before, Dr. Graham is on the board of directors of the Committee on the Present Danger, described in the New York Times as a conservative organization that supports an expanded military program. Is a board of director of this Committee on Present Danger with a military program going to preserve people's lives, working with Mr. Lawrence Bogorad and these people from Europe, from Belgium, Holland, Germany, and Canada, with his live bacteria in the United States? Or is this part of the escalation of germ warfare tests that the Pentagon did years ago, spraying chemicals from ships in the harbor in San Francisco or in the subways in New York and giving syphilis to people in Alabama? What part of this operation that melts together at this point in time, who became noticeable to me just one day apart, what are their links exactly to science and to warfare? And why does Ronald Reagan have the man who was the director of NASA when the Challenger blew up become the scientific advisor working with the executives of AGS? Now, as part of the conservative group that he heads, he's the director. He's not just a member of Committee on Present Danger. One of the people who's active on that committee is William Hewlett, Hewlett. He's a partner with Packard, Hewlett-Packard. Hewlett just gave $50 million to Stanford University, of which Graham graduated from. He came from there too, and Mr. Packard just gave $70 million to Stanford this past year. Hewlett is a trustee of the Rand Corporation. He's a director of Chase Manhattan Bank with Henry Kissinger, a board activist at the Chase Manhattan. He's a trustee of Stanford University, and along with David Packard, he sits on both the Committee on the Present Danger and the Trilateral Commission. So he is part of that, and it was Mr. Packard, David Packard, who was invited by President Reagan to redesign the Pentagon and shuffle that around. We haven't even done any broadcasts, shared that information, on inviting Mr. Packard to redesign the power structure of the Pentagon. Mr. Packard, with his background, not Mr. Packard, pardon me, William Hewlett. I don't know if Packard is Mr. Hewlett, is a trustee of Stanford. I know Packard is there too, but he's a member of the Committee on the Present Danger. Some other members of the Committee of the Present Danger that share it with Admiral Graham, who's now the President's science advisor, including biology, our welfare with DNA and AIDS in biology. Among them is Richard Allen, who came from Germany after World War II with money from Germany to set up the Georgetown Center for Strategic Studies, of which Graham also is a part. Other members are Richard Burke. He's a very strong activist from the State Department, Military Affairs. Stephen Bryan, Bryen, whose name is linked now recently to the Jonathan J. Pollard case with Rafi Eitan from the Mossad. I don't want to confuse you, but these people are linked not only to the Committee on Present Danger, but to the recent spy scandal that's being hushed up. William Casey, a CIA director, is part of the Committee on the Present Danger. So is Joseph Churba, also linked to the Mossad, Rafi Eitan. Then I've described Eitan's role with Permindex and the persons behind the murder of John Kennedy again. It isn't just that NASA, with connections with Louis Nizer or John J. McCloy with Johnson & Johnson, and they're making AIDS experiments up in the shuttle, the Discovery. But these people weave, as I say, back and forth with current agencies and agents who do go back to Dallas. Fred Ickel, the strong anti-Soviet Deputy Secretary of Defense, is a member of the Committee on Present Danger, works closely with Claire Sterling and Michael Ledeen and Paul Hensa, who created the story that the Bulgarians and the KGB tried to kill John Paul II, the Pope. John Lehman, Secretary of Navy, who's going to get an honor. He's the honorary spokesman for the military at the Statue of Liberty. We don't need a person from the Navy. John Lehman is the most aggressive, as I say, in saying coldly how he will start World War III. He's a part of that group, as is Edward Luttwak. Luttwak is currently on a hit list. Gaddafi would like to kill John Singh Laub and Edward Luttwak. Luttwak wrote Coup d'etat, and it tells you how to overthrow governments and take over. He's the expert on how to overthrow and take over a government. And, of course, Dallas was a blueprint for Edward Luttwak, who came here from Europe and works with the National Security Council. And in Washington, D.C., he's a member of the Committee on the Present Danger. Richard Pearl, described as the real tiger of the entire Pentagon, the most anti-Soviet. He's the most anti-Soviet person, if you can mention a most. I don't know who it is. And Richard Pipes, some of these names may be confusing. Richard Burt, Richard Pearl, and Richard Pipes, all close to the anti-Soviet bloc, the Eastern group that want to really instigate and never appease or get along with the Soviet Union, instigate what is known to and referred to as World War III. And Pipes has been active at Harvard. He's there and works at Harvard and for the Committee on the Present Danger. That's one of his activities, not as part of Harvard, but that's one of his activities that Mr. Graham is on the board of directors of. And out of Harvard comes Mr. Bogorad of AGS. So that's just a few people, John Lehman, William Casey, the whole power structure of people who have been known to push more chemical warfare, biological warfare for the President of the United States. They are part of that group, and Mr. Graham, William Graham, Admiral Graham, is part of it. Now, as soon as he was announced, Admiral Graham, as being the scientific advisor, and there's no use calling him Mr. It's a warfare state, and the Admiral takes care of the biological part of the United States, so let's just keep calling him Admiral Graham. As soon as he was appointed, and that didn't happen quickly, the President probably had this brewing for a month or two, or even long before the Challenger even went down. He was only the acting director of NASA, but one day after the announcement that Bogorad had a ear to the White House, the story came out in the wire services. Advanced Genetic settles their complaints. Advanced Genetic Sciences said yesterday they had a settlement with the Environment Protection Agency. The settlement was that they were supposed to pay a $20,000 fine. It was dropped to $13,000, and Joseph Bouckaert, Bouckaert, said the agreement means that they can go ahead now and get a use permit for testing bacteria in open spaces. And this article is in the San Francisco Chronicle, told how they were stopped in Monterey County because there were fears that it might harm the environment, that led to an uproar in the rural community. And you better know that it did lead to an uproar of a few people, and the news media from around the world were there. Another story that I'm going to develop more later, as I say, from Wall Street Journal, has to do with a biological firm called Fermenta. It's in Sweden, and it's run by Mr. Grillhammer. The head of the company is Grillhammer owns Volvo. He's the chairman of Volvo. And Fermenta is a biological system that is in Sweden. The details sound similar to AGS. And Fermenta AB is owned by Volvo Car Company, and Mr. Grillhammer, the head of Volvo, is one of the officials of Kissinger Associates. It's Sweden's drug and biotechnology industry under Fermenta, and there's been a lot of scandals about that, and a lot of names have surfaced that I have outlined and will share with you. Another article in Wall Street Journal just recently, Roman Haas has to settle 23 suits involving cancer. Now, several executives from AGS and also Roman Haas themselves have put a large percentage of funding into AGS. It's a splintered group from these various larger companies, one of them being Roman Haas, and they recently made a settlement for $25 million out of 23 lawsuits of causing cancer for approximately 72 individuals that will get a settlement. So their record, even as of this past week, say of June, of 86 is hardly clean. The cancer goes way back a long time, but they finally made a settlement, and they've been doing pollution, as has J. Peter Grace, and I haven't even gone into his problems and the 7 deaths that have followed since they have polluted New England, I believe it's Connecticut, and or Massachusetts rather, where J. Peter Grace has a place that is spilling off a chemical plant that's causing leukemia there. Now, after the announcement of Graham becoming the head of Reagan Science Department and Mr. Bogorad of AGS, praising the fact that he has an ear to the White House, within 19 days, an article came out very shortly, because the announcement was actually the 5th rather, of June. And right after that, an editorial came out just this morning in the Wall Street Journal, 18 days after the appointment. And the gist of the article is titled Rumpelstiltskin. The editorial is long, and it's unsigned, and it's about Jeremy Rifkin in biotechnology being like Rumpelstiltskin in the fairy tale, who taunts the queen about the name of her first child and tries to get her name, and it delights in frustration. The article, if you can call it an article or an editorial, is about the enjoyment Jeremy Rifkin gets in frustrating AGS. Now, all of a sudden, with Mr. Bogorad, the president of this prestigious national science group, and working with Admiral Graham, all of a sudden the Wall Street Journal takes a long attack at Jeremy Rifkin for what he's trying to do, which is to protect the environment. And their purpose, of course, is to go hog wild with the powers that be. And I'm sure Mr. Rifkin cannot stop Roman Haas or IG Farben or Standard Oil unless he understands their connections to some of the things they've done before and the threat of what they could do in the future just based on their track record. I called him in Washington this morning and asked him if he knew that Bogorad, the man who was on the board of AGS, was affiliated with Graham, who's the new science advisor, and that just days after Graham was appointed, a full-blown attack, a barrage of disinformation was thrown out to the Wall Street Journal. And I sent copies of information of Mr. Bogorad and where he came from. He came from Eastern Europe, incidentally, and I had this on my broadcast, and we'll review it for you if you want, and told him his role as a officer in the board of directors of AGS and in the scientific board of AGS, and how he has an ear in the White House. And after that, not only do the fines get reduced and the AGS can start putting out their live bacteria, but then Mr. Rifkin is slammed with this horrible kind of an article. Now, the article from Wall Street Journal said Jeremy Rifkin, as I say, is biotechnology's Rumpelstiltskin. He delights in frustration, just as Rumpelstiltskin did with the Queen. The article goes on, Jeremy Rifkin, working in Washington, cavorts with the regulatory bureaucracy, federal courts, and media newsrooms, and holding hostage the emerging benefits of genetic engineering. Now, we heard the emerging benefits of atomic energy, of atomic weapons. It would keep us in peace. It would give us all this energy to replace electricity that was going to run out. The world has never been closer to war. We have 50,000 atomic bombs ready to go. There's never been a time where we were closer to dropping them and taking the consequences, better dead than red. It's given no security to generations that have come since then, and it hasn't made anything better. Whatever the emerging benefits are of genetic engineering, I hope he isn't saying that they are similar to the emerging benefits when they sold us these atomic weapons. The Wall Street Journal says, like Rumpelstiltskin, Mr. Rifkin fashions what passes for gold in Washington. Favorable publicity out of facts made of straw. Well, Mr. Rifkin doesn't make gold by having publicity. He isn't making money on this. He's putting up his own money. He's putting up his own time. He isn't selling anything. He isn't running for office. But AGS says they want to make an $80 billion industry out of genetic altering. And these other people are anxious to do the same thing without the known consequences. The whole thing is reversed, that the people and the companies ready to roll with genetically altered products are the ones who are altruistic, and that to give publicity about the lies that they've told and the spraying that they did that they weren't supposed to do, and the conditions that they didn't meet, and the fact that they actually were doing this 2 years ago in Texas and didn't tell anybody, and they sprayed trees in Oakland without permission to do it, and we're going into area where there was homes and it wasn't cleared out. None of that is a factor to Wall Street Journal. The only factor is to break down Mr. Rifkin as being a person in the way of tremendous benefits to society. The editorial goes on, the genetics could have enormous effects. President Reagan has recognized this fact. And there they go into Reagan in this editorial. It sounds more like it was written by Thomas Buchanan and his organization, his conservative organization, and goodness knows William Casey and Richard Allen, former National Security Director, they could, from the National Security Agency, they could come up with a few authors like Buchanan, if not Buchanan. But this article says that Ronald Reagan, the President of the United States, recognizes the fact of the enormous value of genetic engineering. You can better believe he does. I believe he recognizes the enormous fact of how it could serve his particular purposes. And he goes on, last Friday, June the 20th, Reagan revealed a set of guidelines designed to simplify regulations of promising new organizations and facilitate their manufacture. So on June the 5th, he announces, and Graham isn't sworn in yet, but he announces that Mr. Graham will be his science advisor. And on June 20th, he has already talked about reducing the regulations, and so that the deputy under Graham, who may be acting director right now, who hardly approves, the current acting director who's stepping out approves of Graham, the admiral, the Star Wars chief, the atomic bombs expert, so that they're promising wonderful things of these organisms. The editorial continues, to see how Rifkin's process works, it is useful to take a closer look at his highly publicized 4-month assault on a small biotech company. And again, sometimes I repeat for a purpose, and it's useful to do that. The argument about AGS as being a small company goes on and on in all the literature. How can you come down on a small company? How can you hurt a small company? If you have a director that flies back and forth from Belgium, if the bacteria is live bacteria brought into the United States, and I'm not even sure that is legal. I understand it's live bacteria. It doesn't even taken care of in Oakland where they work on it in the lab. If it comes from money, 15% of the money from Roman Haas, from DuPont, from Standard Oil, from Canada, from Belgium, from Sweden, from the Max Planck Institute in Germany, how is this a small biotech company? Just as Litton Industries started by taking $43 million of cost overruns, in quote, from used aircraft, then they became in charge, and I want to do more on that in the next week, if not next week, the week after, become in charge of the National Institute of Health. They simultaneously overthrow the Greek government and put a Nazi regime into power there and effect the transition of Spiro Agnew as Richard Nixon's vice president, coming around out of the Greek dictatorship. And Litton Industry takes money from an aircraft factory like Hughes Aircraft, whose profit goes to the Hughes Medical Institute for DNA and AIDS and immune studies, and then they take their money into Litton Industries and make electronic equipment for the Defense Department and also work on immune systems and health at Fort Detrick, Maryland, and all the laboratories, the germ warfare laboratories, are turned over to people who have splintered off from Hughes Aircraft. So Hughes can work two angles. They can send their money and profits to Florida and then distribute it around the country to specific hospitals that have been linked to biological and chemical experiments on human beings, or they can start their own company in California and give them an office in Fort Detrick, Maryland, where they all connect again and make a full circle of the United States, linking defense and medicine. I don't have time to finish the editorial here against Jeremy Rifkin, but the tone is really offensive, and it gives the rationalization for the Environmental Protection Agency excusing their spraying trees or causing of canker into trees that they injected with this bacteria. It's a complete whitewash, and the point is that AGS now is identified as working closely through one of its founding board members with the head of the science department now for Ronald Reagan, and Reagan is reducing the penalties and whitewashing anything that these institutions do. And as I say, as governor of California, he had no love for the farm workers or this area where they work, and it is a very suspicious set of circumstances. I'm running out of time now, so I have to stop with AGS. I'll do more next week on AGS, AIDS, the new science advisor, and what is taking place in Washington. Meanwhile, this is Mae Brussell. I'll be back with you next week. Thank you for the books and articles, and I'll try to answer some letters probably this week.